Have you ever heard a disappearance case that almost hurts to think about? Where the circumstances are just so strange and weird that you almost can't even wrap your mind around what happened. Well, the final disappearance in today's video is exactly that, although the first one is definitely much more disturbing. As always, viewer discretion is strongly advised. Now, I want to preface this story by saying we don't know very much about Abbas Amand and his wife Sarah, apart from a few crucial and disturbing details. We know that they lived in the village of Qamishli, about 435 miles northeast of Damascus, Syria. We also know that they had children and that they fought, and unfortunately, this went beyond normal fighting. We don't know what exactly caused their problems, but we can assume that their marriage was arranged given the area and time they lived. This may have resulted in the stress of a loveless marriage, or a marriage that had gone sour, or simply one or both partners just not being great people. Whatever the case though, their arguments became so common that they became normal fixtures of village life. And according to neighbors, Abbas was usually the instigator. After these fights, sometimes they wouldn't see Sarah at the market or even outside the house for days on end. And when she finally resurfaced, she often had black eyes and bruises on her face, neck, and arms. Friends, family, and neighbors worried about her safety, but for whatever reason, nobody intervened on her behalf. Tragically, things went on like this for years. Over time, the arguments got louder and more frequent, but by then, most villagers barely batted an eye when they started screaming. Abbas and Sarah got into yet another brutal fight one night sometime in mid-1975. The screaming reverberated through the quiet village and eventually stopped later that night. And after that, Sarah was conspicuously absent. And something strange happened a few days later. Abbas started doing the family shopping himself. This was definitely odd behavior for a man with a wife in a traditional culture. At the market as well, he avoided eye contact, spoke as little as possible, and hurried away quickly after getting what he needed. Based on their history, everyone likely assumed that Sarah was in such bad shape that she couldn't even go out in public. Maybe she couldn't even get out of bed. Eventually though, someone worked up the courage to ask Abbas where she was. After a moment of solemn contemplation, he said she abandoned him and the children because she couldn't bear to live with him for another second. Word of the desertion then spread, and truth be told, nobody was that surprised considering what Sarah had endured over the years. However, the story took a dark and tragic twist the following morning when a horrified farmer found a headless female body in a field not far from the family's home. Apparently, the woman's head was never found, but despite this, at the police station later the following morning, a number of relatives and neighbors positively identified the body as Sarah. And taken all together, the arguments, the abuse, the alleged abandonment, and the headless body all made perfect sense. The police then arrested Abbas and charged him with murder. He denied killing Sarah and claimed the body in the field wasn't hers, but understandably, nobody believed him. Likely the only question in people's minds was, did he kill her because she left him, or did he snap during the final argument and make the desertion story up to explain her absence? Whatever the case though, he maintained his innocence throughout the trial. Not that it mattered though, because he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. The couple's kids then went to live with relatives, and Abbas wound up in an indescribably awful Syrian prison. This is where he stayed for 5 long years. For Abbas, prison life was unbearable. He missed his kids and his freedom, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't come to grips with the fact that he'd been convicted of killing his wife. At that point, all hope must have seemed lost. At least it was until early 1980 when Sarah, who was officially dead, showed up back in the village. As you might imagine, everyone was floored, and she was also genuinely dumbstruck when they told her what had transpired in her absence. She would go on to say that she was living in Damascus, that she didn't know about the murder or Abbas's conviction, and that she had come back because she missed the children and wanted to try to work on things with her husband. Because she had suddenly reappeared, Abbas was then immediately pardoned and released, after which he immediately marched straight home. But instead of welcoming his estranged wife back, he would go on to strangle her in front of their children and a number of other eyewitnesses. Back at the police station, he told the authorities that she must have known what happened, and that instead of coming to his aid, she callously left him to rot in a horrific prison. According to at least one source, Abbas's attorney argued that he couldn't be tried for the same crime twice. Unfortunately, we don't know what happened next. But considering that he actually murdered his wife in front of eyewitnesses the second time around, it's safe to say that he was likely convicted and resentenced to life in prison. As for the headless woman in the field, it's unclear if she was ever identified. Despite its relatively southern latitude, Pakistan is one of the most glacier-rich regions on the planet, largely due to its mountainous topography. In fact, by some estimates, the country has as many as 7,000 glaciers. Many of these are located in the rugged, remote, and beautiful Khoistan region between Afghanistan to the west, Tajikistan to the north, China to the east, and the disputed Kashmir region to the south. The area is best known for towering mountains, deep gorges, and all-around stunning natural beauty. For part of the year, locals visit the lower elevations to hunt, catch fish in the abundant lakes and streams, and graze their animals in the green pastures. But for most of the year, the higher elevations are totally off limits because the area has notoriously harsh winters. Annual average snowfall often exceeds 10 feet, and it's often twice as much at higher elevations. Needless to say, it's not the kind of place most people go to get away from a family dispute. But as they say, desperate times call for desperate measures. And in a man named Nassi Rudin's case, the family dispute was far more than a normal one. By the summer of 1997, 31-year-old Nassi Rudin had a wife and 2 children. But in late 1996 or early 1997, he and his family were forced to flee their ancestral home in the Palace Valley. Unfortunately, we don't know exactly about the family feud that prompted the relocation. According to some sources, Nassi Rudin's family had some sort of honor-related conflict with another family. But at least one source suggested that it may have been an intra-family feud. But either way, the situation eventually got so out of hand that Nassi Rudin's younger brother was murdered. So shortly thereafter, in June of 1997, Nassi Rudin and another brother named Cassie Rudin left their home on horseback in the middle of the night to avoid similar fates. With the fear of being followed, they headed straight into Khoistan's rugged and largely inaccessible Lady Valley. Even in the summer, this area is dangerous with things like rock slides and avalanches because the rock on the slopes is notoriously loose and unstable, and the snow rarely melts at higher elevations. The 2 brothers knew these very conditions that made Lady Valley so dangerous meant it would afford them some protection. To throw anyone following them off their trail, the brothers opted for a narrow path that was generally only used by local shepherds during the summer months. We don't know how long the 2 brothers were on the run, but during that time they had little choice but to accept and embrace the inherent danger and harsh conditions. Every night they slept in caves or out under the stars, exposed to fierce winds, frigid temperatures, and whatever else was out there. To be on the safe side, they never stayed in any one place for more than a night or 2. They knew their very survival depended on staying on the move. Even despite how careful they had been though, one afternoon, gunshots rang out behind them as they guided the horses down a particularly precarious part of the trail near Sapit Valley. Since the sound of the shots echoed off the canyon walls around them, they couldn't tell how far away the shooters were because they couldn't actually see them. Nonetheless, 2 things were abundantly clear. First, it confirmed their suspicion that they were definitely being followed. And second, that the men who wanted to kill them were dangerously close. Now, here again, we don't know exactly what happened next, because as is often the case, accounts vary. Some sources claim that Nassi Rudin jumped off his horse and sought cover in a nearby cave, and that he was simply gone less than a minute later when Cassie Rudin scrambled inside to join him. But according to another source, Nassi Rudin and his horse fell through a thin patch of ice and disappeared into a deep, dark crevasse. Whatever the case, Cassie Rudin searched frantically but never found a single trace of his brother. Eventually, he realized that the only thing left to do was to go to the nearest village to get help. Late that night, he took an alternate route through the pass and successfully evaded his pursuers. Then, after an exhausting journey, he reached a small village late the following morning. Unfortunately, the local peace officers weren't very enthusiastic about trekking into the Lady Valley to look for his brother, who they knew from experience was probably already dead anyway. From their perspective, people were known to disappear in the Lady Valley on a semi-regular basis. Most were killed by avalanches and rock slides, and most of the victims were never found, but even so, Cassie Rudin persisted. And eventually, he and a small search party hiked back to see if they could find Nassi Rudin. Unsurprisingly and tragically, they didn't have any luck. Cassie Rudin knew the officers and searchers were right and that his missing brother was almost certainly dead. Over the following years, he regularly returned to the area with uncles and cousins to look for his body, so at the very least, they'd be able to give him a proper burial. Sadly, no trace of him was ever found. Eventually, Cassie Rudin and a few other family members made one final pilgrimage to the site where they held a short funeral in his honor. And after that, they went back home and got on with their lives the best they could. In the years that followed, apparently, the deadly family feud eventually blew over. And by the summer of 2025, Nassi Rudin was little more than a collection of fond memories from family. That all finally changed nearly 3 decades after he disappeared on August 1st of that year, when a local shepherd named Umar made a remarkable discovery. He and his fellow shepherds regularly grazed their flocks on green valley pastures that were basically frozen solid during the fall and winter months. Even in the summer, though, the passage were still surrounded by towering glaciers and huge chunks of ice that split off and tumbled into the valleys below. That day, Umar found something he'd never seen before while attending to his flock. He found a fully clothed and remarkably well-preserved man suspended in a huge, relatively clear block of ice. In fact, the man looked like he'd only been dead for a few hours or perhaps a few days at the most. Like Cassie Rudin did all the way back in June of 1997, he trekked to the nearest village to get help. The mystery man was still there when he and the local authorities returned a few days later, and after that, the painstaking process of chiseling him from his icy tomb took nearly half the day. When the man was finally freed, the national ID card found in his pocket identified him as Nassi Rudin. When the body was taken to the village, the authorities discovered that his brother had reported him missing nearly 3 decades before in the summer of 1997. In many respects, far northern Pakistan is like the land that time forgot. Even today, it's not much different from what it was 100 years ago. But one thing that is different is that many of the region's glaciers have been slowly melting over the past few decades. Between 1980 and 2024, the average annual temperature rose by about 1.8 Fahrenheit or 1 Celsius in the region. Along with significantly decreased snowfall, which acts as an insulator, this warming has caused huge chunks of formerly stable ice to shear off the glaciers like never before. If not for this warming, Nassi Rudin might have remained in the ice in a state of near-perfect preservation for centuries or even millennia. Cassie Rudin was also still alive when he heard that his brother's remains had finally been found so many years later. As he wanted to do in the late 90s, he eventually retrieved his brother's body and gave him a proper burial. Even though he was found, though, it's not entirely clear how he died or how he ended up trapped in the ice. Jeffrey Smith woke up early on the morning of April 10, 1997, next to his wife Judy in their Philadelphia hotel room. The couple was visiting from Boston so that Jeffrey, who was a lawyer, could attend a work-related conference there. Seeing that Judy wasn't awake yet, Jeffrey decided to get dressed and head downstairs to have breakfast while his wife slept in. After having his meal, Jeffrey returned to the couple's room to find Judy in the shower, getting ready for the day. The two joked around and laughed a bit, with Jeffrey even suggesting that Judy should go down and partake in the hotel breakfast in what she was wearing at the time, which was nothing. Having only been married for about 8 months at this point, the two were still very much in the honeymoon phase, and while Judy had no business in Philadelphia, she loved to travel and see new places. It was her first trip to the city, and while Jeffrey was attending his conference, she planned on heading out to see the sights, namely Independence Hall and the Liberty Bell. Before Jeffrey left for the conference, the couple made plans to meet back at the room at 5 p.m. that evening so they could attend a cocktail hour together at 6 p.m. With that, they kissed one another goodbye and Jeffrey left the room for the conference while Judy continued to get ready for her sightseeing plans. When the conference session came to a close at 5:30 p.m., a little later than expected, Jeffrey went back to the room and prepared to find Judy already inside. But when he opened the door, the room was empty. After waiting there for a few minutes, he began to wonder if maybe Judy had mixed up their meetup plans. Maybe she thought they were supposed to meet at the cocktail party. So Jeffrey decided to head back downstairs to see if she was already mingling with the other conference attendees. As he milled around the room though, he found no sign of her, so he walked back up to the room to continue waiting. Over the next half hour or so, Jeffrey repeatedly returned to the cocktail party, only to end up coming back up to the room in search of Judy. By about 6:30 p.m., with still no trace of her anywhere, Jeffrey's fear began to grow. He then approached the hotel concierge and explained the situation, so they began calling local hospitals to see if Judy was there after some kind of accident or some kind of medical emergency. However, she wasn't at any of these either. According to Judy's plans for the day, she departed the hotel in the morning aboard a tour bus, which would take her to the various landmarks she hoped to see. Knowing this, Jeffrey got the idea of getting a cab to follow the bus route so he could look for her along the way. Jeffrey continued to search for his wife around Philadelphia until midnight when he realized he had no other option but turn to the police. When he arrived at the police station to report Judy missing, however, he was once again turned away. It was the Philadelphia police's policy that missing persons reports could not be taken until 24 hours had passed since the person in question was last seen. So frustrated, Jeffrey had no other choice but to return to his hotel room and wait until the next day to file the report. He spent the rest of the night wide awake, worrying himself sick about what might have happened to Judy. The next morning, before returning to the police station, he went down to the conference, which was being attended by Philadelphia's mayor and a member of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives. Jeffrey managed to talk with them and relayed what the previous night had been like at the police station. Both politicians apparently contacted police with their concerns over Jeffrey being snubbed when he tried to report Judy missing. So that morning, when Jeffrey walked into the police station, 2 detectives were awaiting his arrival. An investigation then got underway immediately, but probably not in the way Jeffrey was expecting. To some work in the case, he was their top suspect. It didn't seem to matter to them that Jeffrey's whereabouts during the window Judy went missing were well accounted for, as he had even been a speaker during one of the conference's sessions. Other detectives, meanwhile, believed that Judy was having some sort of midlife crisis and that she would return in due time. None of this got the case anywhere fast, so Judy's family took it upon themselves to try and find her. Her 2 children from a previous marriage arrived in Philadelphia soon after learning that their mother had vanished and searched the city for her. They rented bikes to quickly travel around, stopping by hospitals, homeless shelters, and even the morgue, but everywhere they turned was just another dead end. After waiting for days in Philadelphia for some kind of break in the case, Jeffrey had no other choice but to return to Boston alone. This didn't stop him from continuing to find Judy, though. Even while at work, he sent out about 9,000 flyers featuring Judy's picture and information via fax and mail to locations across East Chicago. Once again, though, these efforts proved to be fruitless. In the week or so after Judy disappeared, Philadelphia media outlets picked up the story and Judy's face appeared in both the newspapers and on TV. As word got out and the public became aware of who to look for, reports and tips started flooding in. The vast majority of these led nowhere, but some reported sightings of Judy were seen as credible. Within Philadelphia, some citizens believed they crossed paths with the missing woman during the rather large window of time on April 10, 1997, when she was on her own. Like, for example, someone reported that they saw Judy around 3 p.m. at the corner of Broad and Locust Streets and that she appeared disoriented. 2 sightings were reported in the Penn's Landing neighborhood of Philadelphia, and both mentioned that the woman they saw appeared to be disturbed. One of the strangest sightings that was reported came from Philadelphia's Society Hill Hotel. Staff there claimed that Judy was a registered guest at the hotel from April 13th through April 15th, so this is about 3 days after she disappeared, although she checked in under an alias. Apparently, her behavior at the hotel was more than enough to get attention of hotel staff. Some employees referred to her as their weirdo of the week and said she appeared to be suffering from some kind of mental illness. She apparently spoke to herself in tongues and assured the front desk that someone she called the Emperor would send her money to prolong her stay there. Most strangely though, at one point, staff said the woman stood in front of a wide-open window and masturbated for all to see. Another call came in from New Jersey, where a clerk and a customer reported coming into contact with Judy at a Macy's department store. According to the report, the woman they believed might have been Judy had said she was shopping for her daughter, but that her daughter rarely liked what she picked out for her. To Judy's family, this sounded exactly like her, and one of the most convincing details this report mentioned was that the woman was wearing a distinctive red backpack. Everyone who knew Judy said she rarely went anywhere without it, and she was known to have it with her in Philadelphia. Strangely though, as the woman was leaving the store, she tried to get another customer to leave with her. Very few of these reported sightings that came in were without some kind of odd detail or twist. Many described a woman who was visibly and obviously confused or mentally unwell, and while all of this gave police plenty to work with, none of these leads produced Judy. For the next 5 months, this is the way it went for both investigators and Judy's family. Jeffrey even hired several private investigators, but unfortunately, none of their work got anyone any closer to finding the missing woman. Everything finally changed, however, on September 7th, 1997, in a highly unexpected place. Early that morning, a father and son were hunting in a national forest near Asheville, North Carolina, when they stumbled upon a horrifying sight. Near a picnic area were the scattered remains of a human body. In the middle of the many bones lying on the forest floor was a shallow grave, indicating that the body had been buried at one time but was likely dug up by wild animals. Police were informed of the find, and they quickly got to work trying to figure out the identity of the body. The medical examiner determined that the bones likely belonged to a woman between the ages of 40 and 55, and noted that the left knee showed obvious signs of being severely arthritic. Upon further examination, distinctive marks and chips in the bones indicated to police that the woman had been stabbed, making this a murder case. A doctor at a North Carolina hospital saw a news story on the discovery of the body and remembered hearing about a woman who went missing in Philadelphia earlier that year. He then faxed a copy of the article to the Philadelphia police. They then retrieved Judy's dental records from Jeffrey and passed them along to authorities in North Carolina, who confirmed that the body found in the wilderness was that of 50-year-old Judy. This meant that the mystery of what had happened to her was revealed more than 600 miles away from where she was last seen. This brought up the obvious questions around how she ended up there, but the scene itself offered strange clues that sparked even more uncertainty. Judy's leg bones were found to still be covered in what she was wearing when she died, including jeans and hiking boots, but Jeffrey had never seen Judy wear the clothing before. The scene was also absent of Judy's quintessential red backpack, but a black and blue vinyl backpack was located near the bones. Additionally, a pair of expensive sunglasses were found at the gravesite, but as far as Jeffrey knew, they didn't belong to Judy. As the sheriff's office began to investigate in North Carolina, they learned of possible sightings of Judy in the Asheville area from back in April. She was purportedly spotted by a staff member at the Biltmore Estate, which is a tourist attraction known as America's largest home. Judy apparently visited several local retailers in Asheville and even told one clerk she ran into that her husband worked as an attorney in Boston and that he was attending a conference in Philadelphia, so she figured she'd go to Asheville while he was busy. Again, this makes no sense because Asheville was 600 miles away. This encounter immediately struck Jeffrey and Judy's children as odd, because she had never once mentioned Asheville or any desire to go there. The owner of a deli in the area also remembered someone matching Judy's description come into the store in a gray vehicle and purchase $30 worth of sandwiches along with a toy truck. Another owner of a campground also reportedly had an encounter with Judy. He said that she arrived in a gray sedan and asked him if she could camp there in her vehicle. While they spoke, he noted the vehicle was filled with boxes and bags, and when he informed her that she wouldn't be permitted to the camp in her car, she drove off. These Asheville area sightings were both strange and important to the investigation, but they didn't answer the most important questions of why and how she ended up there. With so little information, detectives in the jurisdictions that were investing the case had their own theories. One investigator close to the case believed that Judy came to Asheville of her own free will, meaning she was not kidnapped and forced there. But if that was the case, how did she end up buried in a grave? Early on in the investigation conducted by North Carolina authorities, Jeffrey was ruled out as a potential suspect in his wife's disappearance. Crucially, Jeffrey was known to be at an all-day conference when Judy vanished, and for another, he was not in any physical condition to carry or force his wife so far into the wilderness. Jeffrey was apparently morbidly obese to the extent that it limited his physical abilities, and detectives just didn't see how it was possible for him to commit the murder. Philadelphia investigators, on the other hand, aren't so convinced. In fact, to this day, Jeffrey has still not been cleared by Philadelphia police. This seems at least in part due to the fact that Jeffrey refused a polygraph test. But according to Jeffrey, he only refused to take the test if it wasn't going to be administered by the FBI. Unfortunately, the reasons for that are unclear. In the years since Judy's disappearance and murder, at least one person close to her believes that Jeffrey had a motive to kill his wife. According to a friend of Judy's, the marriage was on shaky ground despite being only 8 months old. She even described their relationship as tenuous, but thus far, Judy's friend is the only person who has come forward with these claims. Everyone else who was close to the couple told the police that their marriage was problem-free. Jeffrey tragically passed away in 2005, never having learned why Judy left Philadelphia and ended up dead in Asheville. Police departments in both Philadelphia and North Carolina continue to work the case to this day. So, what do you think happened? How did Judy end up 600 miles away in the first place? Based on the sightings, it seems like she was there on her own free will, but at the same time, could she have been suffering from some sort of break? And then most importantly, how did she end up buried in a forest? There are just so many strange missing pieces in her story that it makes it all feel impossible. Anyways, if you made it this far, thanks so much for watching. For those of you who listen to fall asleep, I've organized the stories into playlists on Spotify, Apple Music, and other platforms so you can just hit play and let them run. The link for that is in the description. Also, a huge thanks to everyone who supports the channel on Patreon or as a channel member. In case you weren't already aware, we've got early access content on Patreon if you're interested. And finally, if you have a story suggestion, feel free to submit it to the form found in the description. And hopefully, I will see you in the next one.